when you set the patient up so that the patient understands that it's not two separate events where you get your CPAP today and these supplies, that's a whole nother program and different people that you're going to talk to. It's all part of PAP therapy.
What's something you think has stayed the same over the last 20 years and something that you think has radically changed?
I think if I had to pick one thing, it would be the fact that, with all of this work that we've done related to trying to diagnose patients with sleep apnea, 80% of patients who are undiagnosed are still untreated for sleep apnea.
How do you make sure that you're ensuring personalization, innovation at that huge level?
I think that we all understand that the world has changed a bit as it relates to how patients and how people want to communicate. Now you'll see more outreach that's sort of a combination of text messages, emails, and phone calls when needed. We've also learned that patients want to be set up a little bit differently from a CPAP therapy perspective. CPAP therapy is certainly the gold standard. It's the majority of how patients are treated with sleep apnea.
Robert, thanks so much for joining today. Today, we're talking sleep and scaling businesses and what it's like to have over 23,000 LinkedIn connections. Today, we got Robert Miller, VP of Sleep at Apria Healthcare, and also a host of his own podcast, Sleep Tech Talk, which is the go-to podcast for all things sleep tech and innovation. So with decades of experience in the home respiratory and sleep world, from everything Philips to Apria, it seems like, Robert, you've seen everything. We'd love to dive in and get this thing started.
Alex and Wayne, thanks for having me. Look forward to our discussion today.
Awesome.
Absolutely. We always kick these things off the same way. Who is Robert Miller without getting the whole story, but just a little bit for our followers that don't know who you are, that might not be connected with you on LinkedIn. Kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thanks for giving me just a few minutes. Robert Miller, I'm currently the Vice President of Sleep with Apria Healthcare. Most in the industry know the company. We've been around for a long time. I've only been with Apria for about 4 years. There's been a lot of change and a lot of chaos in the industry, I would say, over those 4 years. But about me personally, I've been in the field of sleep medicine. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 32 years. Now I've started as a sleep tech in a sleep center back before there were digital systems available. So I started on paper and way back in the day, and was able to work, through various roles and have been able to be a part of a sales organization. I've been responsible for a large national sleep company's business. I've been a part of business development, and now at Apria, I really am part of what's called the commercial strategy team, and also marketing. So I'm responsible for the messaging and sort of the sales strategy for our company today, and the marketing that we do. So that's sort of professionally where I'm at. Yes, I do have a few LinkedIn connections. I guess we'll dive into that one, more in depth in just a few minutes. But I guess more importantly, I'm a father. I've been married for 35 years now. I have 6 children and 6 grandchildren, and am pretty involved with the men's group. In the mornings, we do some exercises at 5:30 in the morning. So shout out to my guys.
That's great.
Yeah, we're all out working out in the mornings before most people get up.
That's awesome. What type of workouts are we doing? Cardio, lifting weights, CrossFit? What do you like?
A little bit, yeah. It's sort of different every day, but we even have a couple of days where we play pickleball. So there's a lot going on. Yeah, we have some cardio stuff, and although I think our group, the older we get, the less we like to run.
Pickleball is definitely more fun than running. That's for sure.
It is. It is.
Yeah, it's funny. I have friends that do these sort of like organized leagues where it's like either softball or something. It's all guys who are kind of like, they're not young. Everyone's kind of getting older. And it seems like every time they play, there's always like someone who's like screaming like, oh, my hamstring, oh, my back, I blew my back out.
I actually saw an article that when pickleball got so popular, it was actually like putting a strain on the healthcare system in Florida because of so many people twisting their ankle. And there's
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I mentioned that the Sleep Tech Talk podcast, I think that we just released our 102nd episode that came out a little earlier today. Yep. And, we've been very fortunate. We had this idea. I had this idea of doing a podcast for sleep techs. And because I knew that the American Academy of Sleep Medicine had a podcast, I really didn't see a place out there where, sleep techs were sort of being catered to. I would say that the show is probably it has morphed over time and has become more of a sleep industry podcast because we have a lot of new startup companies that will reach out to us and they want to get on the show and have their products promoted. We had a new company that has an insomnia solution that's a non-pharmaceutical insomnia solution called Morpheus from Neurovalens. They're a new company to the space, so that was interesting.
That's awesome. I told Alex our goal was 100. So I think we're on episode 10, maybe 8 or
Something
9
like
or
that.
10.
Yeah,
Somewhere.
we might need to take a couple tricks from Robert on how to become
Yeah,
a skilled podcaster. We're still learning the ropes over here, but I think we got a good
So-
cadence now.
What year did it start, Robert? How long did it take you to get to 100?
I think we're working on year 3 right now.
Awesome. I see it all over LinkedIn. What kind of inspired you to start, building all of this in public? How did the whole LinkedIn thing start as well? Because I'm getting up there too, but I'm trying to keep up with you. I see your number just keep going up. I think I
Yeah,
might
well-
have the second most in DME.
Wayne
Yeah,
called himself the
you know-
DME influencer, so I know Wayne's over here taking notes for sure.
So,
came up.
the whole LinkedIn thing really started for me years ago when I was at a company called Apria Healthcare, one of the largest sleep diagnostic companies in the U.S. today. And I was actually had moved out of operations. I was doing business development, and I wanted to connect with as many hospital leadership, people as I could in the industry. So, I started posting content on a regular basis. And if anyone follows me or is connected to me on LinkedIn, that anything that I could find related to the world of sleep medicine from a clinical perspective, and then even sometimes new tech. I like to keep the content, as up to date as possible. And every once in a while, I'll trip up on, some information that's really important, I think, in the industry. And I've had a few of my LinkedIn impressions that will have like 80,000 views
Wow.
of my LinkedIn posts. You just have to find the right content on the right day, I guess. But I think I have just a little under 25,000 LinkedIn followers today. And I think I was looking at some of the analytics. I think I had about 800,000 or a little more impressions over the last year. So,
Wow.
a lot of engagement with LinkedIn content. And then with the podcast, that just has expanded, not only my reach, but my co-host reach in the industry. At Sleep 2025 this year, we were able to co-sponsor an event for sleep influencers. So that was a lot of fun to bring in people who they're putting out content and promoting the world of sleep medicine, and to have us all in one room was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So you definitely worked with some of the biggest names, especially in sleep, like Philips, SleepWorks, MedBridge, Apria, of course. What's something you think has stayed the same over the last 20 years and something that you think has radically changed? I know you started off with paper, so that's probably a big radical change, but
Yeah.
what do you think?
So, I think if I had to pick one thing, it would be the fact that, with all of this work that we've done related to trying to diagnose patients with sleep apnea, the number 80% of patients who are undiagnosed are still untreated for sleep apnea. Like, with all of this work, how have we not, chipped away at that number a little bit? In fact, I've heard some, statistics recently that number is actually higher than 80%. I think that, and it is, maybe it'll be part of our discussion, but there's a lot of change that is occurring right now. And I think the beneficiary really is the patient, meaning that, this undiagnosed patient population is out there, and it's getting easier than ever to get diagnosed. You can schedule a sleep telehealth appointment with one of the providers that are out there, almost instantaneously. And it has moved up the timeline for a patient from diagnosis to CPAP therapy, where it used to be, in some cases, it's months in a traditional sort of sleep lab model. But with some of the new providers in the space, it's made that a couple of weeks and a patient's able to get therapy. I think there's one
Yeah.
other space that's also incredibly expanding right now, and that's sort of the direct to consumer play that is happening today. You've seen, Eli Lilly launched their Lilly Direct to consumer campaigns where they're going after undiagnosed sleep apnea patients. ResMed has that today also with
Yep.
lots of ads on social media. So, the amount of education that's being done related to sleep apnea today is significant. So I think patients are getting the opportunity to get diagnosed and ultimately get to treatment faster than ever.
I know obviously Apria scale is massive and there's a lot of players in the space that are kind of doing what you guys are doing. How do you make sure that you're ensuring personalization, innovation at that huge level?
Well, I think that we all understand that the world has changed a bit as it relates to how patients and how people want to communicate. We've become an automated world. I mean, how many times does your phone ring and you don't answer your phone, but if you get a text message, you'll reply to the text message. I think that we've
Exactly.
all
Every time.
right. That's
Yep.
exactly right. And we've learned that same, sort of that same protocol in working with patients. So, now you'll see more outreach that's sort of a combination of text messages, emails, and phone calls when needed. And I think that we've also learned that patients want to be set up a little bit differently from a CPAP therapy perspective. The sort of traditional model has always been, you go to a DME provider and you sit in a room and they fit you with a mask and then they educate you on your CPAP machine and you got to go home and figure all the things that they just taught you. You got to figure it all out again. Well, I think today the world has shifted just a little bit, and this idea of virtual care for CPAP therapy has become a significant. Patients have benefited significantly from the ability to be set up virtually, and then even in some cases, I think that there are patients who feel pretty confident. I heard this term a couple of years ago, and I like it, so we use it today. It's called self-directed care. There is the ability for a patient to use resources that are available. How many times do you buy things off of the internet today and you just watch a video and you go do it? That is, that's certainly another way. So, I think it's trying to find the right method and the right model to interact with the patient that really suits their needs. And, once you've been able to identify how do they want to communicate, what's the best method of getting started for that patient, all of those things together can lead to, a great patient experience and good outcomes.
It sounds like there's a lot of tools in the toolbox to help kind of lower some of the roadblocks for improving patient outcomes these days. What do you think are some roadblocks that still exist, or any insight on that?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges today, and this is not to beat up our diagnostic partners, is just that, I think that with the more simplified types of tests that occur today through home sleep testing and so many patients being diagnosed through home sleep apnea testing, it has unfortunately caused a little bit of a lack of education sometimes related to the significance, the health outcomes or the health consequences of not, taking your CPAP therapy seriously and committing to it and being adherent. I tell people all of the time that, one of our most committed patient populations sort of organically at Apria is our Medicare population because, they're a little older, they're committed to their, to making sure they're as healthy as possible. And, so I don't want to say that it's an easy patient population, but they are certainly more engaged in their therapy than, some of our younger, patients who are, maybe not necessarily, maybe they don't understand the full consequences of what sleep
Sure.
apnea could do long term.
What do you think the solution to that is? Because I was just thinking about myself, if that was me, I could definitely see myself, it's hard to think 30, 40 years ahead of, what a possible consequence would be. Is there anything that you think would help move the needle for like a younger generation that's on sleep therapy?
Yeah, I think that education and sort of setting the tone of, from a therapy perspective, if that could be done a little earlier in the process. I'll give you an example. And again, not beating up any part of our ecosystem in the world of sleep medicine, but if I'm a primary care physician and I regularly do send patients for sleep testing, well, thank goodness for that. But, it might be a good clinical situation if the patient is able to follow up with a sleep specialist. Although we need we need more sleep specialists in the industry to be able to take care of all of the patients that are, potentially out there that need to be treated.
I noticed that there's a pretty big increase in this new technology of like these wearables, right? So a lot of people wearing these whoops, the bracelet that kind of monitors your sleep, your steps. Same thing with like these rings. It tracks your sleep and your steps. I'm assuming that when you get these feedback data points as somebody who might have trouble with sleeping, this probably would influence you to have to, want to explore, sleep therapy.
Yeah, in fact, Samsung just released in a news release, I think maybe a week ago, that they have now partnered that when a patient, their device is FDA approved to detect sleep apnea. And when it does that, is if the patient has downloaded the app, they're able to schedule a sleep telehealth appointment to talk about their sleep apnea. So,
Right.
Samsung, from a market share perspective, is pretty small, thinking about Apple. I mean, think about a day where you're wearing your Apple Watch, your Oura Ring, or one of the other wearables. There's also a company called Withings that also has an FDA approved device to detect sleep apnea. It's not clinical, so it can't diagnose, but it certainly is very accurate in identifying patients who have issues with sleep. And I think that if all of those things collectively could absolutely increase the number of patients that are coming through the pipeline that to get to some form of therapy.
What do you think are some of the most exciting trends? We're talking about some of these wearables. Is there anything jumping out at you in particular that you're seeing in sleep right now?
Yeah, I love all of it. I'm a sort of a geek when it comes to all of the tech. I think the things that, especially the ring types of technologies that are out there, I'm happy for patients that we have those types of tests. I'm actually I'm trialing something right now personally here at home that, to see what the experience is going to be like. And, so far it's super easy. It's something that goes right on your finger. It's connected to an app. The app gives you all the instructions, although they need to add OSA education along with the instructions. But it's super easy, and it's something that the patient can, you know, receive in the mail, get started, and help them get to a place of diagnosis.
Well, this is kind of a side question, but something like the Whoop bracelet, is that something like a sleep doctor would actually use those results, or does it need to have some sort of, I don't know, does it have to be like prescribed by them or one of these, FDA cleared devices? Like, is there a place for that with the doctors, or more like just personal saying, okay, my sleep score is high, my sleep score is low, I'm tired, I gotta, sleep 10 hours tonight instead of 7?
Yeah, I think it primarily helps to jumpstart the conversation with a physician today more than a diagnostic. Now, at some point in the future, once those devices are clinical grade, maybe there's an opportunity to have that device become a diagnostic, but then maybe even part of remote patient monitoring. I mean, think about a day where your CPAP device and your Oura Ring and your Apple Watch are all connected to the same app. And
Yeah.
there's some companies that are out there doing some of that. There's a new sort of a startup called Rook, Rook, that is a sort of an aggregator. It's a data aggregator where they're able to connect to all of these different types of devices. And in fact, they're connected to hospital EMRs and even pharmacy EMRs. So they're really trying to connect all the pieces, of the puzzle that might connect directly to the patient.
Maybe one day insurance will cover an Apple Watch for me.
I know, right? That'd be
Yeah,
They're
great.
pretty sweet.
I have heard of some Medicare Advantage plans where they're now starting to deploy a ring technology on some of those patients who are part of the Medicare Advantage plan. So they're creating some connectivity to these patients to be able to make sure that as much as they can monitor and connect and interact with the patient from a health and lifestyle perspective, they do that.
You got it. The easier it is, the higher the adoption. That's for sure.
Yes, surely.
I want to just flip back to the podcast side because I think it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Just because me and Alex are starting the podcast. What has been your favorite episode or topic so far? I think you said 109 episodes, 108,
102 and
100, 102.
yes. Wow. I think my favorite part of the podcast would be going all the way back to the very beginning when it was, I don't even know if we have 50 views of the YouTube videos, from those, but going back to the beginning, it was our origin series. Myself and Jerry George and Emerson Kerr, we all had the ability for those first 3 episodes just to tell our story and how we got into sleep medicine. So, I think those are probably my sentimental favorite, but we've had incredible guests over the years. And, it's always, even like one of our most recent episodes, we had Dr. Cronin from ApneaMed. It's a new pharmaceutical treatment for sleep apnea that'll be out sometime in 2026. For him to come onto the program and then even for ApneaMed to take the podcast and sort of rebrand it, if you would, and post it on their own LinkedIn page. I mean, that's pretty
That's awesome.
exciting.
Definitely cool.
Hey, when
That's the
you,
goal,
yeah,
right?
it is when you're getting them to share your content because the information that was covered was we had Dr. Michael Bruce recently, who's the sleep doctor, and his episode is great. If you want to be inspired about good habits for sleep, you should absolutely listen to that episode. So there's lots and lots. I mean, we had Dr. Valerie Cacho who came on and talked about women's sleep and sleep health for females, sort of before this newest trend of the industry talking more about females. So, again, we've had lots of new products. Huxley Medical brought their home sleep testing device on the show before it was on the market. Just lots of great
It's
things.
awesome.
And we have great sponsors too for our podcast. So it's helped us to be able to, support the program and the different things that we've been able to do from a promotional standpoint, like host the the influencers, event at Sleep 2025, and we even get pretty good coffee mugs, that are
There you
available
go.
for us. So, we're very appreciative of all of those things.
I actually
been,
just had a
go ahead,
realization
Alex.
here. No, I was just gonna say I just had a realization, and what the podcast is great, and it sounds like there's a lot of really good content. So anyone who hasn't checked out your podcast definitely should. And I was just thinking to myself, I think this is the first podcast that so far we have not talked about the one buzzword that we talk about in every podcast, which is AI. And I figured I'd give you an opportunity to touch on that quickly because, like I said, it comes up every single time in some capacity. What way is Apria kind of including AI in either their offerings, their technology, or what way are you guys using it personally?
Well, I think the first thing I have to say about AI is, again, I love it because I'm a tech nerd and love all of the things that are out there today. But, it is interesting because we certainly have incorporated some things from an AI perspective on the front end from a patient onboarding as we get new referrals. So there's some of that, but we've also have been evaluating some of the tools that are becoming available, like AI sleep coaches and AI resupply agents. Imagine getting a phone call and and it feel very natural in the conversation, but you're able to order your new supplies. I mean,
Totally.
it's coming, it's available. There's companies that have that type of technology. It's also scary a little bit that you don't know that you're necessarily talking to something that's not a live person. So I think sort of collectively, all of those things will just give us more tools to be able to communicate with patients and with things on the horizon like competitive bidding, which could potentially reduce reimbursement. You have to be strategic and use technology in a way to not necessarily degrade the service that you provide, but ultimately give the patient a good experience.
Yeah, we've had 2 AI companies on so far. I think everyone will join us. So our goal is to be the sleep tech talk, but in the DME niche. So
I love it.
you've inspired me. So I've always followed you and thought that was super interesting. So
Yeah.
we're honing on the DME side though. So we've had some cool companies, we've had some providers on. We got to get to 100 though.
That's right. Well, we've had some other companies, Data, which
Yep,
has
I'm
been a
familiar with them.
significant player in the world of sleep medicine for a long time now with their AI scoring. But they have some new things that basically have been able to take some FDA-approved oximetry and turn it into a home sleep apnea test. So, when you look through their news and announcements at Data, it's a lot of new partnerships with different companies out there that have helped them to turn their rings into a home sleep
Wow.
test. So their Sleep platform, I think, is what it's called. But it's all of those things that I see a potential place. And I talked about it actually. Emerson and I were able to present at the National Sleep Meeting, and we talked about some things relative to the future. And I mentioned the fact that I could see a place where AI is used to, basically through a hospital's EMR and identify patients based on medical criteria alone as high risk for sleep apnea. And then it's just a matter of how do we get through this mass of people who need to be at least evaluated and potentially, could be diagnosed with sleep apnea.
What's some advice you have for someone trying to drive change in like a very large traditional organization?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that you have to be consistent in the things that you believe in and things that are important. For me, I feel very strongly that if you're in the DME space today, that, you have to I think you have to start to be open to change, because the world of sleep therapy is going to change over the next 3 to 5 years. We've seen Inspire come in the last couple of years and really make a significant difference in the industry as a whole. And it's funny because if you look at the total number of patients that's actually had the Inspire procedure, it's a pretty small number relative to the number of patients who are on CPAP therapy. So CPAP therapy is certainly the gold standard. It's the majority of how patients are treated with sleep apnea. But we also know that, back in December of 2024, that Lilly's Zepbound was approved, their GLP-1, to treat sleep apnea. It's potentially causing some disruption in the industry today, but it's hard to gauge because some patients are on a GLP-1 for diabetes, not necessarily for sleep apnea, but they get the benefit of being on the GLP-1 and the weight loss and all of those sort of things. We have Apnimed, on the horizon as well. And then there's even a pill form GLP-1 that'll be out next summer, I think, around next summer, that I think may even expand the use of GLP-1. So, there's going to be all of these different types of therapies. I think that custom oral appliances will continue to expand and become a regular part of co-therapy for patients who are being treated for sleep apnea. But all of those things, so I guess ultimately what I'm trying to get to is that you have to be open to an idea of, and have a vision of what you think the company needs to become, and then, develop a plan, and then internally sell it to the people internally so that they buy into it. And that way everybody's all sort of marching in the same direction.
Love it. So most of our, I would say, viewers or community are DME providers themselves. What's one small shift providers can make this year that you think would have a big impact on their sleep patients?
Oh, wow. Adherence. Focus on adherence, focus on making sure that your patients have fresh and new supplies all the time. When I worked in a sleep lab, we would have patients come in and they've got duct tape around their mask. And it's like, come on, DME, make sure these patients have their supplies. But I think part of the key there is to make sure that when you set the patient up, again, education, so that the patient understands that it's not two separate events where you get your CPAP today and these supplies, that's a whole nother program and different people that you're going to talk to. And it's all part of PAP therapy. Ultimately getting the CPAP device and the supplies, it all goes together. And if you have a closet full of supplies, then you're not changing them often enough.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your comment earlier about the texting, right? If
Yeah.
My grandma's 90 and she can FaceTime me and text me. So, and people answer less and less phone calls these days, just the reality of the situation. So I think,
Yes.
that really resonated with me and what we're doing here at Nico Health with, automating the outreach and doing the first pass by text, because there's no harm in texting first, sending an email. They might respond even quicker. And then if they don't respond
Yes.
to those, then you can proceed to call. But, that just really resonated when you said that with what we're doing. So I think, text your patients.
I do think it's also helpful too if it's an interactive text where the patient has the ability to respond, so that it gives you can create the communication and the dialogue, and you haven't picked up the phone.
Yep. Yeah. So if you can just make it easy over text, I think that's the way to go. There'll always be a place
I
for
agree.
phone calls, without a doubt. But the Alex did a lot of research on the population, the amount that are expecting digital experiences. Like I always think I always think about the dentist for some reason, because my dentist texts me so many times from their EMR, and it
Yes.
works. Like I'm always even if I can't make it, I'm already rebooking so quickly. So I just always think about how much the dentist texts and if it's working, and their business lives off of scheduling. So it's definitely the way things are going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something, for all of us, that we assume that with sort of our older population that they won't necessarily be as savvy. But I'm sitting in church yesterday, and this little old lady who has a walker in front of her pulls out her cell phone, and she's like surfing the
Yeah.
internet. So
That's right.
they're more skilled, I think, than we give them credit for.
Right. I think AARP put out a report about, I think, over 80% of the elderly population is actually totally fluent on modern phones like smartphones. So
Yeah.
we probably don't give them enough credit. But yeah, texting is the way to go. It seems like, for sure.
Love it.
Yeah. Wayne, do you have any closing questions before we move to rapid fire?
I think we're on to the rapid fire, Robert. Are you ready?
Of course. Let's
All
do
right.
it.
You're a
Let her rip.
podcast pro, so this will be easy. Early bird or night owl?
Early bird for sure.
Yeah, well, you got to get good night's sleep if you're a sleep guy. So,
Yes.
beach vacation or mountain retreat?
Beach vacation.
Number 3, Alex. I don't know why we put this here for the sleep influencer. Coffee before bed, yes or no?
Heck no. And especially if you get to my age, you can't even have caffeine after noon.
Yeah.
It was a curveball.
Let's see here. What else do we have? Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
No way. That's
Sleeping with
un-American.
sleeping with your socks on or off. I think that answer's un-American too.
Well, I actually just posted something on LinkedIn about this a few weeks ago, and
No.
got some differing responses because
Really?
I have never in my life slept with socks on until the last like 3 or 4 months, and for whatever reason, I have to admit that occasionally I have to because I think it's because I'm getting old and I'm just cold all the time.
Gotcha.
Is there any science
was it a
behind
study?
it?
Yeah, was it a study
Can you
or
get better
something?
sleep with socks on?
There was a study, and it was promoting the idea of wearing socks when you sleep.
Interesting.
Really?
Yeah. Yep.
We'll have to get the author of that study on the podcast.
There you go.
All right, last one. If you could only listen to one podcast forever that's not your own, what would it be?
Ooh, wow.
And you don't have to say the newest DME podcast claim to fame either.
Oh, if I could only listen to one and keep it in, sort of the genre of, our industry, it would be Dr. Kosla's Talking Sleep podcast from the ASM. She does an amazing job. She's a great host, and I think that's probably the one that I would listen to.
Awesome. Well, that's all I got for the rapid fire.
Perfect, Robert. I think
And
that's
by the
it,
way,
man.
you guys need to make sure. I don't know if you're on YouTube, but our YouTube for Sleep Tech Talk is where we have seen the most growth. We've actually been able to add like 16,000 new subscribers this year.
Wow.
We were looking at some of our statistics that we haven't quite got to 50,000 subscribers on YouTube, but we're getting close. So for
Just
any of your
chipping away.
audience, if you haven't subscribed to Sleep Tech Talk, please do. And if we're not connected on LinkedIn, please make sure we connect, and would love to interact with. Like, it was great to be able to, at the National Sleep Meeting, Emerson and I did the presentation. And at the end, I just said, hey, listen, if we're connected on LinkedIn, send me a message and I'll send you a copy of our presentation. Except that I had like 50 people send me a request. But I think I got to all of them.
That's great. Well, Robert, I think you did part of my job where I usually ask where to find you at the end of the podcast. So that's awesome. If there's any other way that they need that people or listeners want to try to reach out to you, is there any other way that you miss to make sure
Yeah,
we get you plugged
LinkedIn
in?
for sure. And then I actually have a Facebook group too that has about 3,000 sleep techs. It's like RPSGT, CPSGT. There's some RRT. It's kind of a long list of all of the credentials that
Cool.
are available for sleep medicine. So Facebook group that has about 3,000 members in it.
Great. Well, Robert, thanks so much for joining today. We had a really great time. Maybe we can do this again. Thanks for coming.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Robert.
guys.